All right, the Daily Ticker is brought to you by Pelican Brewing. Visit pelicanbrewing.com for more details on locations, events, and award-winning beers. Independently brewed since '96, Pelican Brewing, born at the beach, locations in Lincoln City and Pacific City. And there's a nice little tap house in the town of our next guest who grew up in Tillamook. There's a nice little tap house in Tillamook for our friends at Pelican Brewing. Bill Oram, the lead columnist, OregonLive.com, wrote a really good piece on Jonathan Smith. Got some one-on-one time with old Jonathan. We didn't. He was not going to do a radio interview. And so he hopped on and talked with Bill Oram, probably in a tunnel somewhere, and he joins us now live from Indy. Good morning, Bill. Have you had your coffee yet?
I found coffee this morning,
Amen.
unlike yesterday,
Okay.
but I had to go out of my way. And the thing I learned is the coffee shops are like inside buildings here. They're like hidden inside, so hotels, office buildings, towers of various kinds. So I went to Cups Coffee Bar inside some large office building, and it was exactly what I needed.
Well, I'm glad you're caffeinated. We texted very late last night, and that was late for me, so I can only imagine how late it was for you. I thought you wrote a really good piece. We talked with Jack Velling on the show. He had shared some goodwill stories as well, similar to what you wrote about, of just like, hey, I got a lot of gear. I do this all the time, but people noticed it didn't really happen until he left. I'm curious, what was Jonathan's energy? Because his opening podium thing, he just struck me as very nervous. And he's not the greatest public speaker, but what was his energy like talking to Jonathan?
Well, I talked to him at the end of the day, and so at that point, he'd been, being shepherded around for, at that point, 6 hours, from interview to interview and different, promotional things for the Big Ten. So his energy probably isn't the best thing to judge him by in that moment. But he was really, I thought he was really, I don't want to say contrite, because I don't get the sense that he really regrets anything, because I think he felt like he did what he had to do, right? But he really wanted to understand what the feelings of Beaver Nation are toward him, and he wanted to try to set that record straight. And like you said, he's not the greatest public speaker. I don't think of him as somebody who, is going to, frankly, fill you with a lot of hot air. So if there was a coach who just wanted to say the right stuff and get out of the pickle of people in Corvallis hating him, it's not that hard to say all the right things and try to BS your way through it. And so Jonathan, maybe not the greatest at expressing his feelings, but I think the takeaway I had from, 20 minutes with him in the tunnel yesterday, which, I didn't expect to have that kind of time, but, him really wanting to drill down and address the topic, is that, he wanted to make things right. And I asked him, the thing I was having a hard time imagining is, how does Jonathan Smith ever come back to Corvallis? Not to be the head coach at Oregon State again. I mean, that's, the kind of storybook stuff that only happens in fairy tales and if you're Mike Riley. But he is a legend in two regards on campus. He is, as a player, one of the all-time greats. And then as a coach, he's taken the program to highs, rarely experienced. So over the years and decades to come, he's a guy who should be welcomed back in Corvallis, for various occasions. And what's that reception going to be like? And I know it's fresh right now and we're kind of prisoner of the moment, but Jonathan Smith steps into Reser Stadium on a game day in Corvallis. He's getting booed. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what that's going to look like in the years to come. So what I asked him was, do you think you've left the door open where you can come back and be embraced? And he said, I hope so. And listen, it's not for me to say, and it's not for me to tell Beaver Nation how to feel, but I hope so too. I mean, you've got to be able to remove yourself from the impact of that decision and his exit, and look at the totality of his impact. And I don't know, and Sprague, you can tell me if you agree, but yeah. I don't think there's anybody outside of Mike Riley, any single person you could point to and say had a greater impact on Oregon State football, at least not in this century.
Well, not in our lifetime.
Right. You can go back, of course.
Right. It's tough, Bill. I've kind of looked at this both ways. I understand the fan point, and given everything that's happened to them, I wonder if they get in the Big 12 in 2 years, do we care less that he left? Because whether you liked the move or thought it was a betrayal, a knife in the back, you have to acknowledge he was one of the best top 25 coaches in his profession. So, were we expecting him to hang out and be a Mountain West coach for a couple years and just be okay with that? Or, do we wish people that we care about or have a tie to us to go on? Now, the way he handled it is a different conversation, but I think the whole way it happened, the reactions to it, it's I don't begrudge him for wanting to go to the Big Ten, seeing what the landscape was. I'd also say it felt like he kind of abandoned the program the last couple games of the season, knowing that this was around the corner.
Well, and I will say this, and it's not in the piece, so this is a 1080 exclusive.
Oh, there we go.
He, with regard to kind of when the decision was made, and I know he had said publicly going into the Oregon game that, if his agent, wasn't talking to schools, he wouldn't be doing his job. And he kind of repeated that to me. But what he said was, I did not make the decision until the very end. But, it was out there, and I was chewing on it for a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of obvious, right? And I don't think he's alone in the way this world works and the way those decisions get made. But you do wonder, right? It's 100% of his mind is not being dedicated to what's happening at Oregon State. There is at least some percentage of his time, thought, and energy going into, do I do this? And, to what degree that affected his, coaching performance those last couple of weeks, I don't know. It would be impossible to ever know. Obviously, that Oregon State team that showed up at the end in Eugene was not the team that we'd seen most of the year.
Yeah.
But, a lot of air had been taken out of the balloon of the season by that point for a variety of reasons, including the fact that it was starting to feel like Jonathan was going to be making an exit.
Bill, do you think if there is some success now with Trent Bray that maybe that could alleviate some of the stress and some of the hatred that Jonathan Smith is feeling? Because I feel like if Oregon State is able to find that success and they're able to move on to another conference or a bigger conference, maybe that along with some time could help him out. Or is there just no saving him at all? He is forever going to be persona non grata.
So there's two things. I was thinking about this morning. There's sports hate and then there's hate.
Yeah.
And I think right now, Jonathan Smith is in the hate zone at Oregon State.
I do too.
I think in time that will become sports hate. And then if all the things you just described, right? Like if Oregon State gets in, by the way, we're in Indianapolis. It's Oregon State here. We pronounce it Oregon State here in the Midwest.
Hawkinson accent.
If Oregon State gets in the Big 10 or the Big 12, excuse me, if there's some success, if Trent Bray proves to be a really worthy successor, yeah, I think the edges are going to soften on that. But I think this moment is going to be seen as a real wound at Oregon State, almost no matter what happens. That said, I hate to say, I just think the Beavers are in trouble. I think the Beavers are in trouble in terms of their talent right now. Trent hasn't done this before. The schedule's fine. It's not the schedule. I just don't see a lot of immediate success that is going to help the Beavers, get through this in a really positive way. I think that you're going to see a big step back, and that's going to get blamed on Jonathan Smith. So in 2 years, the vitriol toward Jonathan Smith might be even higher than it is now.
100%.
And again, I also need to go back to what I wrote the morning Jonathan Smith announced he was leaving, which was not, Jonathan Smith is a backstabbing, Judas. It was more take a step back and consider the fact that he made this decision, because the guy who just left Oregon State was the ultimate Oregon State Beaver. And, I think that part of the reason this stung so bad is people thought if anybody would stay and ride this out in this situation, that was the guy. And for him to leave, you have to say, well, what did he see internally, and what does that say about where Oregon State was in that moment and what he viewed the possibilities as being because of everything that had happened around it. So I still think Jonathan Smith's exit says more about Oregon State than it does about Jonathan Smith. But I mean, there's many, 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 many layers to these things, and many, a lot of things can be true at once.
100%. And usually in this industry, like when the coach doesn't do well and the team loses, it's like, hey, let's question the head coach. I kind of agree with you. I think the worse they do, if they do worse, it's going to be not Trent Bray. It's going to be like, look what Jonathan did. Look what he did to this program, no matter what he's doing at Michigan State. We're talking with Bill Oram, OregonLive.com columnist, also does the Oregonian Sports Podcast with Brenna Green. You're in Indy, and so you wrote a good piece on Jonathan, and it was great to probably catch up and get some of those quotes out. Today's Day and Landing Day. I would argue their first day was also Day and Landing Day when they put an inflatable duck in the river. I'm curious, what are your takeaways so far walking around, seeing Oregon stuff at Big Ten Media Day, and just kind of the vibe of the Ducks coming into a new conference but coming in with such high expectation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a real curiosity around Oregon and this newcomer into the Big Ten. In terms of people are wondering about the style of play and how does Dan Lanning fit in personality-wise with this sort of brethren of coaches in the Big Ten. It is weird. I mean, looking around and I'm looking up at the rafters of Lucas Oil Stadium, massive palace. And there's Oregon branding all over the place, along with Ohio State and the other great traditional powerhouses of the Big Ten, Northwestern, Rutgers, Maryland. And look, I mean, over here to my right, I see Terrence Ferguson. I'm looking at Jeffrey Bossa right now. I mean, Oregon is in the house, and it's been a very weird year. And I know we've talked about it many times, and I've spent a lot of time trying to process this and acclimate to the idea of Oregon playing in the Big Ten and the Pac-12 being no more. And I think, we've all sort of grieved that in a sense. But being here and seeing it kind of unfold, it is cool. It is cool to see Oregon, be part of this group and be on this stage. And to your question about, expected to be a contender, I think that's the most interesting aspect of it. When you think of a newcomer to a conference coming in, you think that it's going to take a little while to get your sea legs. And, and I thought that was going to be the case when Oregon joined the Big Ten. I thought there was going to be a little bit of an adjustment period. Maybe it was going to take a couple of years. There's no room for that. This team is built and ready to go. It's good enough to win a national championship. There's a lot of variables around that, of course. But the talent level, the experience, I mean, the expectations should be sky high because of what Dan Lanning has done between last year and this year to get them ready for this level. So I'm really going to be interested to see what Dan Lanning has to say and what the players who are here have to say. I'm interested to hear what the people who have been immersed in the Big Ten their entire careers, the longtime grizzled Big Ten media members, what they want to know about Oregon. Because to us, Oregon is, we know everything about Oregon. Mm-hmm. And, at this point, I'm going to be curious to see what people who aren't as familiar hope to get out of this day. And I'm going to count the number of times I hear somebody say Oregon. I really am. And I'm going to report back to you guys because yesterday it was too many. I mean, the number of Oregon State questions. And Jonathan Smith, if you are listening to this, which you probably are.
Sure.
That was your moment. If you want to stand up for Oregon State and show that you still have some care and compassion for Oregon State, you should have corrected that person on the podium in front of, God and the 400 assembled media members and said, I need to correct you right there. It is Oregon State, not Oregon State.
Are you correcting people?
I'll start today.
Okay.
I'll start today. And I don't really want to go to the Indianapolis City Jail, but I might do it if I have to body some people to get this straight, because Oregon is now in the Big Ten. We have now planted the state flag of Oregon. I know it has a beaver on it, Duck fans, in the heartland, in flyover country, and we will not tolerate this Oregon nonsense any longer.
Yeah, I appreciate you fighting the good fight because I'm tired of hearing our state said that way as well. It's quite annoying.
Yeah, let me chime in really quickly, Bill. I lived in Boston, Massachusetts for a year, and I found the perfect way to correct people. I've started asking them, do you say Boston, Boston? And they're like, no. Okay. Why do you say Oregon any different way? So just tell people to say Oregon like Boston, and maybe they'll get it into their freaking heads. It's just...
I mean, if I was to try to work up an alternate pronunciation of Indiana, I don't know that it would be appropriate for the airwaves. So I will just... But yes, I could try that here, and we'll see how that goes.
You're a busy man. Are you going to be on McAfee today? You're pretty popular. I didn't know if you're going to go from us to McAfee and then cover Oregon and what you were going to do.
I'm available. If Pat wants to have me on, I can rip the sleeves off of this sweater thing I've got on. We can go. I mean, nobody wants to see those arms, but I'll do it. I'll do it for the content farming, for the engagement.
Well, we look forward to the coverage, man. There's nothing more broy than Tillamook, and Bill Oram is one of the best. OregonLive.com. Good piece on Jonathan Smith. Caught up with him yesterday, and Dan Lanning is going to be at the podium in just a little over an hour. Look for his good coverage at Bill Oram on Twitter, and of course OregonLive.com. Bill, thanks for hopping on with us. Good morning. I'm glad you got your coffee. Now buckle up. It's going to be a long day too.
See you at OregonLive.com.
There we go. Bill Oram, OregonLive.com, joining us. It really was a good piece on Jonathan.